all. So today we're going to be covering topic 5.6, which is on pest control methods. Now, the learning objective for today is that you can describe the benefits and drawbacks of different methods of pest control. You're going to have a chance to look at the different types of pest controls that we have, and as I said, some of the benefits to them, some of the downsides, how GMOs are related to this, how different types of pesticides are related, so all that stuff today. So let's start with what are pesticides. These are going to be chemicals that are toxic to pests, and we've got a few different groupings of them. Rodenticides are going to kill rodents. Fungicides are going to kill fungi. Insecticides kill insects, and herbicides are going to kill plants. Now, one of the things that pesticides can do is you're going to spread them out over an area to kill the thing that you want to kill, such as plants like weeds. However, this can actually cause the pest to become resistant to pesticides with overuse. The genetic biodiversity is going to give some pests, just based on their random DNA mutations and diversity that they have, it's going to give them a resistant trait to the pesticide. And pesticides are going to artificially select for pests with resistance because they're going to kill all of the non-resistant individuals, leaving only resistant ones. So it's going to happen pretty quickly. And this leads to what's known as the pesticide treadmill. So this is going to be kind of this loop where you're going to have to develop a new pesticide, you're going to apply it. Most of the pests die, but then they're going to become resistant over time. Then you have to make a new pesticide in order to deal with the resistant ones, which over time they'll become resistant. So it's just kind of this continual positive feedback loop where you're then having to continue creating more pesticides and spraying more of it in order to deal with these evolving pests. So if you see over time, BT crops are going to be the corn crops that we have modified to be able to resist certain pest species. And if you look at over time, our usage of the GMO BT crops, we're actually seeing that there are going to be more resistant species coming up of the pests that are going to eat them. So over time, we can predict that we will probably have to go to a second method because these are eventually going to not even be affected by the current GMO practices that we have for them. So in relation, we'll continue talking a little bit about GMOs. And as I touched on in 5.3 notes with our Green Revolution, GMOs are going to be where we take a gene for a pest-resistant trait and we're going to add it to the plant through genetic modification so that the plant is now just genetically able to resist this pest. So our very common example that we use a lot is going to be BT corn. We use part of a bacteria gene that's going to produce BT crystals, which are toxic to the pests. So the plants are naturally on their own able to resist pests. Another type of very common GMO is what's called Roundup Ready crops. And they're genetically modified to be resistant to a broad herbicide, Roundup, which means that you can spray it on your crops and it will kill all the weeds, but it won't kill any of your crops because they have natural protection from them. And so this is going to be just kind of the process. Let's say we've got a caterpillar that's destroying the corn. We then go through the scientific process of embedding part of the genetics from a bacteria so that it's going to naturally create these BT crystals, which are going to be toxic to the caterpillar. So if they eat the corn, they will die. So it's naturally protected from this pest. So in the case of BT corn, we have actually seen that decreased insecticide use has resulted from using this genetically modified crop. Since the corn makes its own insecticide, we don't have to go and spray it down to protect it from the pest. So if you look over time at this graph, as we have more BT corn, we've actually greatly decreased the amount of insecticide that we have had to spray on these crops. But this isn't always the case. When you look at the Roundup Ready crops, over time we actually have increased the herbicide, which is the main ingredient in Roundup. It's glyphosate. So since the crops can't be harmed by this, farmers can just spray a ton to kill any weeds that they might have, and they know it's not going to harm their crops. Now, this can be a problem because it can have some negative unintended consequences. For example, there have been some scientific studies that have linked Roundup to possible cancer risks. And so it's not always so great that we're going to be having way more pesticide use because of this GMO crop. Another problem that comes from GMOs is going to be with the genetic diversity. So all of these crops are going to be all genetically identical. They're clones of each other. So there's no genetic diversity in the population at all. So what happens here, as we learned back in our Unit 1 notes, if we're going to have a disease or pest that does affect this crop, they are all vulnerable because they have decreased genetic diversity. So there's going to be no chance of a genetic mutation popping up because they're all just clones. So they aren't having these differences in their genetic makeup. And so if we have an example here of the potato blight, it was something that if you had these cloned potatoes, if potato blight comes, it's going to knock out the entire population very quickly. Compared to if you had like a diverse type of potato, if the blight hits, it might take out some of it, but after the disease, you'll still have some left over. So that's one of the main concerns with GMOs, is that if we have new pests coming that can wipe it out, the crops are going to be in a bad place. And those crops feed people. So this is going to be your practice FRQ for 5.6. I want you to look at this data here, which is looking at the global area of biotech crops, which are going to be GMO crops. So based on this data, I want you to make a prediction about the future use of GMO crops and describe one negative environmental outcome that could come from this. So that'll be your practice FRQ for 5.6, and those were your notes on 5.6.